Thank you, Mark. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honour and my pleasure to be able to talk to you this morning, especially to continue the excellent introduction we've had from our previous session in what promises to be a really stimulating and thought-provoking conference this week. We live in interesting times. 11 years into the 21st century, and we have already seen dramatic developments in the energy market. We've seen a shift in the balance of countries moving from state-run energy companies to private investors and developers. We've seen progress in decarbonising our energy supply through legislation and technology development. In the nuclear industry, we've seen challenges to the market and to society as a whole by the events a year ago at Fukushima. We've seen a rapid growth in the renewables sector, especially wind and solar technologies. And we've seen the rapid development of LNG and new sources of unconventional gas, such as shale gas. These issues will all be addressed in the coming days, and I'd like to provide an introduction by asking, what specifically are the demands of the rapidly growing energy market in Asia? What are the technical and business challenges that we face? And how can we learn from the experience of others, ensuring reliability, safety, and technical assurance as we address them? With acknowledgement to the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook, in the next 20 years, world population will grow from the recently celebrated 7 billion to around 8.6 billion people. Population growth here in Asia and the Middle East will be around 20% to some 5 billion. In energy terms, the global demand will grow by some 30% in the same time frame. But Asia's energy growth is predicted to be closer to 40%. So energy demand is growing between 1.5 and 2 times that of the population growth. Now, we all know there are many measures for comparing energy and fuel sources, and we know we have to be careful. It was referred to slightly in the previous session. If we look at the potential thermal energy value of some common fuels, we know that nuclear fuel seems far more attractive than coal or gas. But what counts is our ability to convert that potential energy into usable energy. If we didn't know better, we might even consider running our plants on chocolate. Those familiar with the IEA reports will recognise there are a number of scenarios for the development of primary energy over the next 20 years. What is most interesting is that there is not a huge difference in the relative position of the different energy source groups. All show oil continuing to dominate, but with a reduced rate of growth compared to the past 20 years. All show the beginning of a reduction in coal and a steady rate, and sometimes a fast rate, in the increase in gas. They show a steady increase in biomass and other renewables, and a slightly slower rise in nuclear. In investment terms, with the global investment opportunity of around 37 trillion US dollars, 10 trillion of that will be in the Asia region. Over 7 trillion on power generation and 2 trillion on gas infrastructure. So some 44% of the energy investment is on power generation and 25% in gas. And as we know, much of the investment in other parts of the world is met from an Asia-based supply chain. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we can conclude that the investment outlook is good. If we focus first on power generation, we see the continued leading position of fossil-fired generation, coal and gas. This graph, based on installed capacity, gives a good indication of the balance between CapEx expenditure for new plant and OpEx expenditure for existing plant. We see the same slowdown in coal, but a steady increase in gas and all other technologies with the exception of oil-fired generation. If we look at Asia on the same vertical scale, we see the continued dominant role of coal, representing 2/3 of the global installed capacity, plus a similar growth trend in the other technologies. If we added the Middle East to this graph, we would see a further 250 gigawatts added to the gas line, bringing it to above the level of hydro. But coal comes at a price. This graph shows the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, in gigatons. Carbon abatement, as we know, continues to be a dominant issue in international as well as national politics. Based on the new policy scenario of the IEA, CO2 in the atmosphere will continue to grow sharply for another 10 years before the rate of growth begins to be checked. This includes major increases in Asia, where the medium term, the rate of emissions rise from new fossil plants exceeds the rate of reduction through closing old plants. There is a potential for more significant reduction in CO2 based on adopting renewables, biofuels and nuclear technology. We also know that carbon capture and storage is developing fast and increasingly being demonstrated in China, in Europe and in the USA. But the other point to notice here, as referred to by some of our panellists earlier, is the continued significant potential for improvements in plant efficiency. Combustion technology is developing to adapt to varying degrees of biofuels. Large gas turbines are exceeding 60% of thermal efficiency, but equally important is their ability to maintain high efficiency and low emission levels at partial load. If we look at the gas market, again we saw earlier it will continue to be a dominant fuel. There are several scenarios, but the difference in each of them is relatively small. What is clear is that new sources such as shale, coal bed methane and tight gas can have a significant impact on the price of gas, as we've seen recently with the gas price in this region being 3 times that in the USA. The other marked development in recent years is the increase in energy trading between countries, in fuels such as gas, but increasingly also in electricity. As engineers in a technology-driven industry, we're always keen to focus on the technology requirements of the market and how we can develop them. In LNG, we have the challenge to meet cost-effective transport infrastructure on fixed and floating units. In nuclear, we have the challenge of fuel processing, life cycle cost, passive safety and stress tests. We've referred to some of the fossil-fired and renewable issues this morning, and we've touched on the transmission and distribution challenge, with HVDC emerging as a key technology for connecting over long distances. Tying this together, we need energy storage to balance the different technologies, and increasingly we are seeing from the technology developers the importance of integrated solutions. Not just one size, but a combination of different technologies to meet the needs of the markets. As business managers, project developers, owners and operators, we need to be equally mindful of the non-technical aspects. Project finance and insurance goes without saying. New regulations in many countries have put a greater emphasis on internal controls, often requiring independent assurance of their effectiveness. This includes identification of weakness and possible design enhancements to the assets to compensate or mitigate risk. Globalization and connectivity have ensured that asset risk is no longer confined to one company, country or continent. How do we ensure that these controls are applied adequately to our assets and our projects and our supply chains? Do we have the right level of independent verification included at the outset of a project or a business plan, providing assurance that the steps taken meet not only statutory requirements, but also take into account best practice industry thinking? It all depends on our perspective in terms of what we see when looking at these issues. If we take an image as a first example, what do you see? A storage vessel? Or an engineering challenge with material design, construction and life considerations? A loading mechanism? Or a complex transportation device with mechanical, electrical and hydraulic subsystems requiring regular maintenance? Perhaps you see a vast space, some clever lighting, or a hazardous work environment. Or maybe you see a financial liability due to downtime for inspection. Understanding our own perspective is the first step in assuring our approach to meeting the demands of the market. In safety and risk terms, we use the analogy of lions and tigers. So what do you see? Lions live in groups on the African savanna. In their natural habitat, they hunt in packs, are visible and audible, and are quite common. They represent occupational hazards. When walking about a plant, you can see the hazards: working from height, confined space, openings, trip, slip hazards. All of these can kill or seriously injure, but they're generally visible to the auditor, safety rep, or meandering manager. Tigers, on the other hand, tend to be more secretive. They hunt alone, are well camouflaged, and you might never see the one that kills you. Like asset integrity or process safety hazards, these are not easy to see. Erosion in a pipe, a stuck pressure relief valve. And what about more subtle threats, a gradual loss of process? Due to changes in knowledge in the organisation or out-of-date operating procedures, how do you know whether these are posing a threat to your assets? So whether occupational safety or asset integrity, both are killers, and we need to make sure we don't ignore them. So what do you see in your own organisation? Do you understand the risk profile of all parts of your business? Do you have the right balance between process safety, high consequence, low frequency events, and occupational safety, low consequence, high frequency events? Do you understand the risk level between your physical assets and your human organisational elements? And does that change over time? Most of our organisations have defined processes that cover the critical issues of day-to-day management. How well are they really characterised for the nature of your organisation? How well are they measured and controlled? Are they optimised to ensure their value? Or are they just there because an auditor or quality manager once said you needed them? Do they really reflect the balance of risk in your organisation? Experience tells us that in the vast majority of cases where something has gone wrong, the response of the senior management team is, "We didn't think we were too bad." Investigation reports from around the world have a similar list of lessons learned: lack of management attention, poor internal learning from experience, strained resources, acceptance of suboptimal procedures, inadequate communication, training, and preparedness. It's important to note that all of these tend to be linked to the human element. So it's hardly surprising to learn that those organisations that get it right, they tend to have a well-defined business, clear roles and responsibilities, but a willingness to learn culture, a risk-based approach to management decision-making, and they use independent assurance to verify their own understanding. The consequence is that they tend to have far fewer events and incidents than would otherwise statistically be expected. Our role in Lloyd's Register is in assisting organisations like yours to achieve these levels of high capability. Through compliance against national, international codes and standards, through independent advice and protecting the value of your high-risk, capital-intensive assets, enabling higher levels of reliability, higher levels of safety, and lower levels of risk. Through smart, experienced, and appropriate management of your assets, your people, and their equipment. Our mission is Life Matters, on land, in the air, and at the sea. We carry out this mission across all sectors: oil and gas, power, water, and transport. In conclusion, we've identified the challenge. We've seen the market opportunity. We're here this week to understand more about the solutions. You have the initiative. You are developing the technologies. You are executing the projects. We have teams of technical specialists in all of your countries ready to assist with independent assurance. By sharing knowledge around the globe, taking a holistic view, with safety as a foundation, we can help you build a high integrity, high reliability, high performance organisation. And together, we have a sustainable solution. Thank you for listening, and I wish you an enjoyable, inspiring, and value-adding conference.